getting real fidgety. We need some distractions. Who am I? I'm a human too. I'm just like you with ASD. Who am I? I'm a human too. I'm just like you with ASD.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Autism Stories, where we connect you with amazing people that help teens and adults with autism become more independent and successful. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. There are many people with autism that not only have a passion, but are very talented in the field of technology. In this episode, we will discuss the technical interview process for those with autism with Tim Goldstein. Tim is the author of Geeks, Guide to Interviews, 15 Critical Items for the Technical Type. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Tim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, you're more than welcome. I'm really glad to be here.
Now, you were diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at 54 years old. How has that diagnosis impacted your life?
Well, it's had a number of different changes. You know, I always knew prior to that I was a little different than most, but never knew why. So first off, it impacted me, and now starting to understand where I've had the challenges. I've had great successes, but I've been, had great failures and been fired a lot too. And it finally made sense out of the whole thing. And then secondly, it kind of put me on a whole different new trajectory of, my passion and what I was chasing after, which is now to help people understand that autism is not just a childhood condition, it's a human condition. And there's all kinds of us adults floating around that are diagnosed or not diagnosed. But most people don't think of that. They think of children.
Mm-hmm. Now, in doing research for this podcast, I learned that technology has always been a part of your life. When were you introduced to technology, and how did that go about shaping your life?
Well, of course, I'm 59 now, so when I was younger, technology meant very different things than technology means now. I actually grew up on a farm, and my dad was a diesel mechanic. So, technology back then was more mechanical kind of things and such. So I grew up, hands-on, learning how to weld with an arc welder at, 12 years old or something, and we constantly, in Dad's workshop and creating things to, blow stuff up and start fires and all the things that you can do when you live in the country. So, pretty much from the beginning, I've been technologically oriented. I got into playing with electronics when I was probably, 12 or 13 or something. And at that point, it was all discrete components. Actual IC chips and stuff weren't even around. But I had an uncle that worked at General Electric. So I was able to get a hold of some components and stuff and start playing there. And then I got into the bicycle industry. And, obviously the bicycle industry is mechanical tech kind of stuff. And, I was a gearhead. So, as techie as you can be. And then, I went through a bunch of other businesses and stuff. And then eventually the whole way I ended up in the computer technology industry, gosh, I hate to think, it's almost 24 years ago, was I was at a party with my wife, at a Christmas party for the company she worked for. And I was just working a series of not great jobs, just making ends meet. And she cornered a programmer on the way out of the door late at night and said, "Hey, my husband loves computers, and what should he do to get involved with them?" And he told me to go learn and get certified on Windows NT. This was probably 94, 95. I mean, I didn't even know what a Windows NT was. But I did have an internet connection, so obviously technological and geeky. And went and found out what it was, found a course online, and went and self-taught, trained on it, got my Microsoft certification. And that, at that point, was a instant ticket into the tech industry with a darn good salary. And from then on, once you're in the industry, you just keep on going.
So you've kind of followed your passion, and one thing sort of led to another.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's a whole number of passions that fall in between that I didn't even mention. I was a absolute nut for flying radio-controlled helicopters, starting back in like '85, and you actually had to fly them. There was no electronics doing the work for you. And flew those for 20 years or so. So definitely, that was a technological piece. That got me into the model airplane business. So I ran a model airplane business. And somewhere along the way, I got into creating a manufacturing business, and I had absolutely no manufacturing nor engineering background, but I taught myself, and 10 years later, had a product line that was being distributed and sold around the world, and reading our cool articles about people saying nice things about it, and all that good stuff. So yeah, definitely very, very technological, and not just computer tech. I mean, it can be mechanical tech, hardware tech. Hey, I'm a geek.
And then how did all of that lead to you eventually writing the book Geeks Guide to Interviews, 15 Critical Items for the Technical Type?
Well, that is a very interesting story by itself. I had just been diagnosed with having Asperger's, which came about from essentially having a breakdown from running a manufacturing company that I started for 10 years and having a simultaneous IT career. So, I held 2 full-time jobs simultaneously for about 13 years straight. And that finally burned me out. I mean, it took a little while. That got me into the psychiatrist and such. That got me diagnosed. So that's how the diagnosis part came up with. Went off kind of in that whole direction, being, like many people with autism, you dive into whatever's your interest and you just, go whole hog with it. Mm-hmm. So I dove in and went whole hog on learning to understand all the different things involved with, being autistic and, fitting in my life. But along the same way, my wife and I went to a seminar. And it was more of a motivational kind of seminar. It was a gentleman named Brendan Bouchard, who's kind of like a Tony Robbins, but a little more cerebral and a lot younger. And we went to that. It was very interesting. I like the guy. I've always been into personal self-development. Mm-hmm. And they offered, additional seminars, like when you go to those things normally to sell you more stuff. And we got involved with the concept of, we knew that we had things that people, valued the advice, the input, the whatever, just because of the, big diverse background. But we didn't know what it was that we wanted to actually teach and train and talk about, but it sounded like, it would be kind of a cool thing to pursue. Mm-hmm. So we started pursuing it, and, we started taking speech lessons and marketing lessons and movement lessons and all those kind of things to learn to be a very good presenter and then to engage with people very well, with no clue what we were going to talk about. I mean, if you had to ask me what did I think it was likely going to be, I would think it was likely going to be something about starting small businesses. That was kind of my general expectation. And somewhere I was at one of the events, and you had to come up with, you started at 2 minutes and then worked it down to a minute. And then you had to condense something down to one sentence. And then you stood on stage and, to 150 people, you delivered your one sentence. And the sentence I delivered was, I'm not like you. I have autism. And I mean, the impact was just incredible. I mean, one sentence and everybody's like, wow, and people are all of a sudden asking you about autism and things like that. And that's what kind of clued me in that maybe that should be the direction I go. Mm-hmm. So in doing that now, you eventually have to take all these things you learned and put them to work. So I was looking through the various, ways that you can package your information and such, to start with one. And I decided that a book would be kind of in the range of the level of effort I was ready to take on and felt I could accomplish. And the reason that I picked that particular subject was, being autistic, and I hate the term high functioning. I almost refuse to use it, but you have to. I like to refer to something I call high interactional alignment. In other words, high functioning, what's that mean? Who knows what it means? But high interactional alignment means in that particular environment, you're probably going to interact okay. So depending upon the environment, you might interact okay, you might not. But it says nothing about, that you have anxiety, that you have, black and white thinking, that, those kind of things. I kind of recognized that, I had pretty high interactional alignment in the interviewing process because I'd been fired so many times. So I had probably gone, I think I went about 14 interviews in a row getting the job offer. So I figured I was fairly effective. And I got to know a lot of the recruiters, the hiring managers, those kind of things. So I said, hey, I already know the people I can go interview. I'm certainly experienced and, pretty successful at doing it myself. And I sure recognize that technical people that I've been working with, and for the last, however, 15 years, whatever at that point, struggled very frequently with interviews. And it was quite obvious as I learned more about autism that they were either autistic or what I refer to as functionally autistic. So they may not meet the DSM check marks, but if you were to put them together with a bunch of autistic people, you and I probably would never figure that out. They just all seem the same. And I recognized there was a huge amount of that in the tech industry. And they, when I went and interviewed the recruiters, the hiring managers, the HR people and such, the answer was very consistently that tech people have a number of areas that they fail in interviews in. And they all deal with symptoms of autism. They socially just don't interact correctly. So people go and they're not going to fit on the team because, they just couldn't chat about anything, or, they might have the challenge of they take a little longer to pull all their thoughts together because they're trying to pull together so much information and not reply immediately. So people go, oh, they must not know their stuff. Not that, no, they know so much stuff, they're trying to get it down to your level.
Right.
So, people interpret it wrongly, but, we all know that reality is the way you see it, not what is actually out there. So they interpret it as being, no, this one is probably not a good candidate at that point. So I was quite aware that the people I worked with needed help. I was pretty good at doing it myself, and I had very good access to be able to interview all the people who do the interviewing and hiring processes anyways. And like I say, what I found was very, very consistent. And it came down to communication, social issues. And in the communication, it was generally not being able to give a concise answer. That was the biggest problem. The opposite problem, which is also common, is giving too little of an answer. Somebody asks, a question and the answer is yes. That's all they give, yes. Or they give, 5 minutes or so technical stuff that people glazed over and, gave up on you anyways. So with all those things and feeling I could write a book, I said, hey, I went and interviewed the people, sat down and wrote the book. And really, more than anything, was doing it as kind of a gift back to the technology industry and all these people that helped me have a phenomenal career.
Now, it's really perfect timing that I'm talking with you today because just yesterday, one of our clients from Autism Personal Coach I was talking to, and she talked to me about how she wrote a novel and she created it as an ebook. So tell me a little bit about how you went about deciding on self-publishing this book, and could you maybe talk about the process for those that might be interested in learning more about self-publishing?
Yeah, I mean, it's really not as hard as anybody tries to make it out to be. And you don't have to go out and pay for a $3,000 seminar to learn how to self-publish a book. While there are plenty of people that will charge you that to do it, it's really totally unneeded. There's plenty of things on the internet that will help you understand how you should arrange a book, how you should arrange chapters, those kind of things. And of course, if you've, read a number of books in your life, especially if they've been in the genre you're going to write in, you already have a feel for how it should move, how it should flow, things like that. So the writing just, comes down to, sit down and tell yourself you're going to write it. I personally have kind of a methodology that I use. And the methodology is that I use a program that's called the type of program is called mind maps. which I don't know if you're familiar or not. For the listeners who aren't familiar, a mind map is basically a way to just record your thoughts, and they each go in kind of like a little little bubble on the screen, and they're all hooked together, chained together. So you could have a chapter hierarchy, and then underneath the chapter have what the sections are in the chapter. So I sit down and first go and work out what's my chapter structure going to be. What are the topics I want to get covered, and what would be the sensible order to get through them. And then I, go and sit down and start filling into that mind map thing underneath that of what, within that topic now, what are the specific detail areas I want to cover. And in the particular version I use, which is a program called XMind, and the reason I use that one is it's supported on Mac, PC, and Linux, so it doesn't matter what box you're working on, you can share the files. And you can generate the output into a Word document, and it spits it out as a Word document outline. So now you just sit down and you just, if you know your subject and it says, you're going to write about how to dress for an interview. And you've got 5 points underneath there of, don't dress like, in the gangster suit, because that's just not the right style. People are going to think you're strange. Don't wear your T-shirt if you're going into a corporate environment, So you got, a couple points that you want to talk about. And then I just start writing about them. And you just start, expounding on them, just like if you were to ask me about, tell me how I should dress for an interview. Just the way I'd say it to you, I just start writing it out. And then, it comes down to doing the normal editing stuff. You read through it yourself. You realize that half your thoughts didn't make sense, and, you edit them out. You get them as clear as you can. And then, you've got to hand it to somebody else to look it over and edit it, because you know what you're trying to say. So even if it doesn't say it real well, you get what you're expecting. So you got to hand it off to somebody else so that they can read it and give you, good, valid feedback. And I actually handed it off to both people who were neurotypical and people who were neurodiverse, because I wanted both sides to, give feedback. So, tweak things out, got things set up from there. So at that point now I have a full manuscript ready to go. I have no covers. For the covers, I actually went to, I think I did from Fiverr. It was either Fiverr or it was Upworks. So one of the, the job type sites where you just go out and say, I want to do this, or people are saying, I'll do a graphic cover for, $40 or whatever it is. And I used my normal approach in those places is I paid 3 different artists to do, covers, because each one has their own style, their own, whatever they come up with when they know what the topic is. And I found that it's so cheap to do it. It's just easier to do 3, 4 of them and then pick the one you like, instead of trying to get one person to change their style. So that now gave me my covers. Now I have a complete book. The question merely is, how do I get it printed? And there's really 2 routes. I mean, you can either go through the traditional publishing companies, which is very hard if you don't have a phenomenal reputation, because what they're really looking at is, what are you going to do and how sellable is your book and how much are you going to promote it being sellable? So they're really looking at you to be more the promotion than they are. It's a difficult field to break into. And for the need of what I was doing, I really didn't feel having a, title named publisher was going to do anything for it, better. So I went the self-publishing route. And the self-publishing group that I went with was with the Amazons. It's probably the easiest to use. At the time, it used to be called CreateSpace. But now Amazon has merged that into their Kindle Direct Publishing. So now you just go in, you look up Kindle Direct Publishing, and it includes both doing ebooks and doing printed books. You take your stuff all formatted out, you put it in a PDF, you shoot it up to them. A couple hours later, it comes back. You can see an online, preview. And you can buy, copies of it for, I don't know, whatever it costs to print, In case of my book, it's like 90, 100 pages or so. A couple of bucks, is what it costs to print them. So you get some copies, get the actual hard copy when you go through it, because sometimes looking on paper versus the screen, you just see different things, whatever. And you tweak out the rest of it and say publish, and that's it. You are now a published author. It really is that simple.
Now, you were talking before about getting feedback from those that are neurodiverse and neurotypical about your book. Did you get many differences in terms of the feedback that they presented?
Oh, very much so. The neurotypicals tended to talk more about what and focus on what the issues and challenges were, whereas the neurodiverse tended to focus on the how to get around that issue.
Now, you talk in your book that technically oriented people think differently than the general population. What do you see as the main differences?
Well, I would say there's a number of things. First, I think most people, whether they work in corporations or don't work in corporations, whatever, have dealt with technical people, and usually most of them will tell you those people are very different. So we just have the anecdotal evidence that neurotypicals are always talking about those tech people, and it's usually in the terms of that guy's a flame, and is usually the way it comes across. So there's definitely, to me, there is differences. The other reason I say that there's differences is we certainly know that, in my case, it's computer programming, but I've also done, product design and hardware engineering. So it's not just computers. It can be, engineering. It can be actually, lawyers, accountants, and physicians also fall into the same category, being high prevalence of, autism leaning. The way I look at it is, we all know that, the technical fields pay extremely well, and there's a whole lot of jobs out there. So if everybody could think the way that you need to think in order to be a programmer, why wouldn't they be going out for jobs that pay over $100,000 instead of jobs that pay $40,000? Well, you kind of find out as you start talking to more and more programmers is they think exactly like I do. And I already knew I didn't think like most people did. So that's kind of how I, came to the conclusion. And then as I started talking to, psychiatrists that I were going to and such, and he would say, yeah, a good chunk of my autistic, ones that are, again, I hate the term, but high functioning, tend to be in technology industries or CEOs. So, there was some confirmation. And then I'm not sure if you're familiar or listeners are familiar with the autism at work efforts that are being done by some of the biggest corporations in the world. But they have also targeted that a lot of the traits that people with autism have make them very, very valuable in the tech fields. And they're out creating programs specifically to recruit those people and to be able to support them once they get there and keep them there. Both anecdotal and, a whole lot of other people chasing after that group, knowing it's the talent group they got to chase because we don't have enough of those kind of skills around right now.
Now, in getting a job in the technical world, you talk about the importance of working with a recruiter. Why is this so valuable in the job search?
Well, I think it's valuable whether you're neurotypical or neurodiverse. And of course, in general, the recruiters are going to be more useful and valuable the higher the pay of the job is, because they get paid on a commission basis, not out of you, but out of the company. So, they're going to put a whole lot more effort into a computer programmer that's, web developer at $75,000. They're going to put a lot more effort into than finding somebody that's going to be a $45,000 job, because they're going to make almost double the amount of money out of it. So where it really helps is a lot of the issues that came up that neurodiverse, autistic people have in the whole job market, the recruiters can help bridge around for you. I mean, I've dealt with recruiters, and this isn't one of the big challenges I have. I tend to be pretty good in outward communication. It's reading faces and body language where I just, totally blow it. But fortunately, interviews are pretty scripted, so you can get away without reading as long as you can transmit real well. And a lot of people, though, who don't have quite that strength of interviewing abilities, if you're working with a recruiter, the recruiter's already in contact with the hiring manager. You probably can't get a hold of the hiring manager. The recruiter, if he has any relationship with them, can say, hey, I've got this person that I think would be wonderful for the job, but they don't interview really well, but technically they really know their stuff. Would you consider at least talking to them, but understand that, their responses are going to be, and, whatever. So they can serve as a bridge for you and essentially serve as the communication piece that both communication and socially. They're networked a whole lot better than most, autistic people are networked. So they are just a phenomenal tool to be able to find jobs. So instead of finding a job being you out hunting for it, it now becomes you just talking to a bunch of recruiters who are out doing all the work for you.
Now, there's certainly a difference in recruiters that can be helpful and those that may not benefit you as much. What are some things someone should look for when they are looking for a good technical recruiter?
What I personally have found has been the most helpful, useful, best ones, and truthfully have often become, long-term friends, are more the small, local, boutique kind of recruiters. The big national recruiters, it's a numbers game. I mean, it's a mill. They go in and they tend to get, young people who are newer into the market, promise them they're going to make a fortune, put them on the phone, just, hammering, smiling, and dialing. They're not going to help you very much. But when you get to the more smaller, local, boutique kind of recruiters, they build relationships with all the companies in town. They're willing to work with you. They're in it for the long term. They're not in it because somebody said, oh, man, you're going to make, $100,000 the first year. By the end of the first year, you washed out. They've been, recruiters for, lots of them I've worked with have been recruiters for 15, 20, 30 years. I mean, they're professionals at it, not, hey, here's a great job, you'll make a lot of money, and then you fall out of it because, you stink at smiling and dialing. Because that's how the big companies work. They don't work on really, they say they want to build a relationship, but that's really not the truth. So that's the first thing is I tend to, if it's a national company, I tend to shy away from them. Those aren't the ones that I try to build connections with. I mean, if one reaches out to me and it's a great job offer, I'll work through them. But they definitely don't provide as much service, benefit, and effort, I've found, as the more local type. Essentially, if it's the kind of place you can go in and the principal people are actually there, that's probably a good recruiter facility to work with. They're around, they're local, they know you. It's not being managed by, high up with, crazy orders of, you got to make 2,000 calls a day or whatever it is that you see with a lot of the big nationals. Another thing that I personally just totally avoid is any recruiter that just sends out the form that says, fill in this form with the numbers of years you worked in this and this and this. And you got my resume. If you can't understand what I do, filling out your stupid form isn't going to help. The problem is you can't read the resume. Which is often very true. They're not technical people. They don't understand what it means. So they're trying to turn it into this lowest common denominator because they don't want to do any real work. So if I get one of those that comes through with just, fill in this form to see if you might fit the job, the answer is you just went and found me on a search because I hit a keyword search and you're just sending crap out hoping I'm going to answer it. As opposed to the smaller recruiters tend to reach out personally. And they'll say, "Hey, we saw your resume from Dice or Monster or whoever it is you got it out there. I mean LinkedIn, I mean all those things, and actually be able to talk about. It looks like you fit this position really well. This is kind of what the company's like. This is the general area they're located. Do you think that's something that would interest you and you want to pursue further?" Well, to me, that's somebody I can work with versus somebody that says, fill out my form and I really don't even want to talk to you.
So someone that's making an effort to kind of get to know you, build some type of connection with you.
Yeah, because what you really want is you want them to understand you at the level that they can go in and sell you on your strengths because we all know if you're autistic that there are weaknesses. Again, I tend to be pretty good at covering them. But if you're around me long enough, there's going to eventually be a day where there's enough stress, enough anxiety, enough mayhem that autistic things are going to come out. And you need somebody that understands that can explain to them, hey, this person's really, really good, but this is some of the challenges that they may have, but if you can manage and deal with that, this person would be just, a rock star for you. As opposed to if you send it in through HR and the normal keyword search and stuff, you probably wouldn't even get talked to. But the recruiter, again, they're in direct contact. So they can sell you to them, whereas you can't do that because you can't, the only way you can sell them is right in your resume. And nowadays, because most larger companies send them all through automated software, you really have to put them in a standardized format that is very, very hard to feature anything that is not a traditional skill.
Now, I always find the names of books as well as chapters interesting. My favorite name for one of the chapters in the Geeks Guide for interviews was titled Prepare or Die, in which you talk about the importance of preparing for a technical interview. Talk about what type of preparation is needed for these types of interviews.
It's really funny, and I'll give you a kind of an interesting little story. When I first decided I was going to write this book, I went and called a group of people that worked at a company that I used to work at but had been fired from. On the other hand, I actually been very good, the person who fired me and I are still very good friends. I've even gone and done consulting work for him on autism. So, it was one of those things, an autistic thing came out, it violated policy, he just had to fire me. So anyway, I didn't work there, but, connection relationships were good. It was just one of those, procedural things that had to happen. So I took a bunch of them out to lunch. 4 or 5 of the guys that, I worked with, and went around the table and I asked them, what is the biggest challenge that you have when you're interviewing for a job? And one of them expressed it so succinctly, and it was just so great. What he said was, my biggest challenge is getting non-technical people to understand how good I am technically. Mm-hmm. He totally missed the point of what the interview was about. When you're doing technical interviews, you have somebody who interviews you on the technical area. But when you're dealing with the non-technical people, they just go, hey, our tech person said that they have the skills. They're not trying to evaluate your technical skills. They don't know how to. They're trying to evaluate, can you fit? Can I work with this person? Will they work into the team? That's what they want to know. But most technical people aren't good at explaining how they're going to be a good fit for the team, how they're bringing, benefits to the team, to the company. Instead, they want to talk about how great a technician they are. So you're giving the wrong message for the wrong person. So when I say prepare or die, those people, again, those tend to be more, they're neurotypicals. It tends to be the managers. It tends to be the HR people. And what they want to hear is, they want to hear stories. They want to hear something about, tell us the time, and these are traditional questions that get asked. Tell us a time you had a conflict with a coworker and how did you solve it? Well, there's nothing technical involved in that question. So if all you did was study all the top 10 questions for your technology stack that you work on, you are totally unprepared to ask a human interaction type question. So my recommendation is, that there's 5 or 6 questions you're always going to get asked. You're always going to get asked, how did you deal with a conflict with, a coworker? You're going to get asked about, what's the project that you're most proud of? Things like that. 99% of the time, you're going to get a bunch of those questions. And they're going to be probably phrased virtually that way. The problem is you need to answer it with a story. You need to be able to relate to them the way they want to be related to, which is they want to hear about how you had human interaction with this person that you had a challenge with and got over it. But if you don't sit down and do that and figure out what that story is ahead of time, how are you going to deliver that story in the 2 minutes that you need to answer the question? Because they don't want to hear 10 minutes of it. If you use 10 minutes, guess what? Our interview, you get 6 questions, you're done. I don't want to be judged on 6 questions, so you need to answer them quick. So you need to get your stories down tight. You need to know when they say, tell us about a time, that you already have the story that not only you can explain quickly, succinctly, only hitting the points that are important, but that also show that your resolution makes you beneficial to their team. So that's when I say prepare, and that's really what the preparation is creating the kind of stories that the neurotypicals want to hear.
In your book, you talked about when you have a face-to-face interview for a technical job, it's rarely about your technical skill set, even when you're asked a technical question. What then do you typically see as the intent of the interviewer when asking technical questions in the interview?
How you handle it. It's not the answer you give. Even if the answer is wrong, they really want to see, how do you handle when just a problem's dropped in your lap? Do you freeze and can't come up with anything? Can you give an explanation of, well, I'd kind of start down this way, but until I really saw it, I wouldn't know the exact details. They're really thinking about your thought process, because in the real world, that's what they're going to do. They're going to drop problems in your lap and expect that you can run with them, which isn't really a technical answer. It's really this is how I handle when problems are dropped in my lap that I need to deal with. That is really what they're looking at more than anything, is how do you deal with problems that are just thrown at you? And I'll be honest, one of my favorite answers to the how would you deal with XYZ, and it's just a bizarre situation. I mean, it's something technically that could happen, but it's a super edge case. It's a bizarre kind of question that most likely nobody's run into their life except this one person that happened to be working on the system that did that thing. And the answer I'm going to give them is real simple. It's the truth. I'd go to Google and I'd punch it in Google. That's what I do. And I've told tons of interviewers that, and the answer is, yeah, that's exactly what we do too. Once, though, I did have somebody who said, cool, and they slid their laptop across the desk and said, good, now show me what you can find for this. And they wanted to see that I could actually do the search like I said I would. But that was only one. All the rest of them just said, yeah, right, yeah, that's what we all do. Cool, let's move on. In other words, you addressed it. You're not frozen. You're not going to sit there for days spinning your wheels trying to figure it out yourself. You're going to go out to the resource that everybody else uses and, be effective with your time.
Now, I'm often in the position of interviewing people to work for Autism Personal Coach. My favorite part of the interview is never about the questions that I ask. It's about the questions that the interviewee asks me. So can you talk about the type of questions someone should ask the interviewer for a technical job?
Well, we'll first start with the questions, and this would be any job that you should never ask at the interview stage. And the things you should never ask at the interview stage is, how much does this pay? If you went through a recruiter, you already know the ballpark they're going to be paying in anyways. If you didn't go through a recruiter, you don't know. But that's a what's in it for me question, not a what I'm bringing to you kind of question. Another thing is, don't ask what the benefit plan is. Don't ask how many days of vacation you get. Now, something that, the kinds of questions that I find are good and that they very much like and respond to is, give me an example of what a day in the life of doing that position would be like. Tell me about how the company, looks at, if you have particular things that you support, whether it's, green energy, whether it's, whatever discrimination. And for me, it's autism. So, one of my questions is, how does your company handle dealing with people who are on the spectrum? And I just ask them straight out. I don't necessarily recommend that question for everybody, but I'm in a little bit of a different situation. If you just type my name in Google, I come up as number one under saying neurodiversity. And if you hit the page, the first thing you see is me speaking saying, I have autism. So better I tell them up front and kind of clue them in than they find out afterwards.
Now, if someone wants to get a copy of the Geeks Guide to Interviews, 15 critical items for the technical type, how would they go about doing that?
Amazon.com.
Very simple.
Very simple. It's available both in Kindle version and it's available in print version.
Well, Tim, I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today.
You're more than welcome, and great chatting with you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode, and thanks so much for Tim for the conversation. Did you know that Autism Personal Coach saves people with autism from feeling alone and being isolated? So often teens and adults with autism struggle with anxiety and as a result don't have success in their lives. One source of anxiety is the interview process. An autism personal coach often teaches people to become more successful in these interviews. To get an autism coach for a loved one or yourself, it's very easy. All you have to do is email autismpersonalcoach@yahoo.com or call 216-336-5889 and request a coach today. In next week's episode of Autism Stories, we will talk with Becca Laurie, a columnist for Geek Club Books Zoo Magazine, which is a digital online magazine written by the autism community for the autism community. Talk to you then.